You are making the world a better place by listening to the Joy of Living podcast. This is your guide to achieving a more purposeful, powerful, and positive life. Join Barry Shore in unlocking the best version of you and becoming happier, healthier, and wealthier. And now, here's your ambassador of joy, Barry Shore.
Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. Maybe you're good-looking because you're always looking for and finding the good. You're tuned in consciously and conscientiously to the Joy of Living podcast with your humble host, Barry Shore, the ambassador of joy. Notice I didn't say the ambassador of joy. The ambassador of joy. And you tuned in for one reason and one reason only. It's the best reason in the whole world because you care the most, the entire world, about you. Y-O-U, which is great, by the way, because when you become the best you make the world a better place. You build more bridges of harmony, create more joy, happiness, peace, and love. And you're right now joined by approximately 504,927 people around the world. And you tuned in because you know that on this show, we discuss the three fundamentals of life. And when you use these three fundamentals, the result is you'll be happier, healthier, and wealthier. What doesn't want that? So the three fundamentals of life are, number one, life, your life has purpose. And when you lead a purpose-driven life, number two happens. Now, in this case, good number two, you go mad. MAD stands for make a difference. And number three is to unlock the power and the secrets of everyday words and terms. Simple example. Our podcast, of course, is carried over the internet, and ask anybody, what does www stand for? Invariably, I'll tell you, it has to do with the internet. And factually speaking, they're correct. However, in our world, the world of the positive, purposeful, powerful, and pleasant, www stands for what a wonderful world. And what is a word, right? W-H-A-T-A. What a wonderful world. And of course, a tip of the hat and a big thank you to Louis Armstrong, Satchmo, for enabling that song, What a Wonderful World, to go viral and not just touch tens of millions or hundreds of millions, but billions of people around the planet. Whenever you hear the opening bars of what a wonderful world, what do you do right away? You can't help it. You smile. Now, smile is one of the most important words you could ever internalize, utilize, and leverage in your life because smile stands for seeing miracles in life every day. That's right, seeing miracles in life every day. Now, I got to tell you something. I am privileged to speak to people on a regular basis on the internet, millions of people every month, and I do in-person appearances. Recently, I spoke to a group of 1,172 people, and I'm talking about the story of Barry Shore, and talking about seeing miracles in life every day. And some people raise their hand and say, hey, Barry Shore, I've been up for hours, I haven't seen any miracles. And I asked them, are you here? Can you hear? Can you stand still? I can't do that. Can you walk? I can barely do that. Do you have water, drink? Do you have food, take, place to sleep? Do you have family, your friends? Every single one of those is a miracle. And the simplest proof, 1 million people didn't get out of bed this morning. You know why? They died. By definition, if you're watching or you're listening, you didn't. Therefore, you have an obligation to live life to the full. And you're going to learn a lot about living life to the full from our amazing, wonderful guest today, Richard Hurowitz. And just be prepared to be moved because it is truly wondrous. So I got to tell you a quick story. It's about me. Imagine I'm standing up in the morning, hale and hearty, able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. And that evening, I'm in the hospital, totally, completely paralyzed, my neck down. It's called being quadriplegic. And it was not from an automobile accident. It wasn't a spinal injury. It was a rare disease, which I never heard of the day before. It took over my body and rendered me completely, totally paralyzed. I can only communicate by blinking my eyes. I was 144 days in the hospital. I was in a hospital bed in my own home for 2 years. I couldn't move. 4 years in a wheelchair. I have braces on both my legs, my hips to my ankles. That was progress. Thank God today I'm able to be vertical and ambulatory with the help of a 7-foot walking wall. So I'm a triped, not a biped. Can't walk up a stair by myself. Can't walk up a curb by myself. I have help 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. However, you hear my voice. Positive, purposeful, powerful, and pleasant, all because of that one word. Smile. So let me tell you a quick story. My 8-year-old niece comes over to me a few weeks ago. She says, Uncle Barry, can we spell smile S-M-I-E-L? I thought about it. Smile, sounds the same. Why not? I asked her how come. She says, because then it would stand for seeing miracles in everyday life. Out of the mouth of an 8-year-old. But what was she doing? She was creating the kind of world that she wants to live in. Now, CREATE is a fabulous acronym that stands for causing rethinking, enabling all to excel. It's called a shift in perspective. Now, shift is a wonderful word. I've been working with people for more than 45 years, and I can tell you something. When I work with them, when they come in, and very successful on paper, but most of them have dropped the F in shift, and the other stuff happens. You got to be careful with your Fs. You want to shift your perspective just a little bit, and everything changes. Then you can internalize, utilize, and leverage the 6 most important words you'll ever learn. And these are choice, not chance, determines your destiny. How you choose to respond in any given situation will determine the path of your life and your trajectory. You're going to learn a lot about choosing a path in life. Now, before we bring on amazing, wonderful Richard, I just want to warn him and new listeners, and thank you for bringing your family and friends. We have 25, 30,000 new people every week, so we'll be up to 1 million, and God willing, in the next few months. And I urge you to share this with 5 people. You want to share it with 50 or 100, it's up to you, but at least 5 so we can touch millions of people around the planet. And of course, love us, not just like us, love us on Apple and Spotify. So before we bring on wonderful Richard, I'm warning new people that I do use a lot of 4-letter words. I even use the 4-letter FU word. I do it because of the shock value when it's fun. Now, of course, the 4-letter words that we use, because we live in the world of the positive, purposeful, powerful, and pleasant, are love, life, hope, play, pray, free, gift, swim. And the 4-letter FU word is fun. Fun, that's right, FU, capital N. Now, right away, some people say, Barry Shore, fun's only spelled with 3 letters. No, world of the positive, purposeful, powerful, and pleasant. Fun is spelled F-U, capital N, capital S. After the show, when you see your family and friends, you have a twinkling eye, smile on your face, point your finger, say, F-U, everybody. Remember to add capital N right away. You got their attention. Now you can share with them what it is you're going to be learning about and touch and feel in the next while with wonderful, amazing Richard. Before we bring on Richard Hurowitz, I just want to urge everybody to use the 2 most powerful words in the English language 3 times a day from now and the rest of your life. These 2 words are thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks stands for to harmonize and nurture kindness. To harmonize and nurture kindness. KIND is a fabulous acronym that stands for keep inspiring noble deeds. I can't think of anyone that inspires noble deeds that I want to share with you anymore than amazing, wonderful, fabulous Richard Hurowitz. Richard. Did we lose you again? Technology is so great when it works, and I think it may not be working well. Richard, can you hear me? No. And it looks like his machine froze again. We had that situation a while ago. So he's going to go out and come back in. In the interim, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Richard. And it's so important to know. If I started telling you all the things that he does and is doing and has accomplished, it would take the rest of the show. I'm just going to give you 3 data points. Number 1, Richard is a writer, an investor, and the publisher of something called the Octavian Report, which is a magazine of ideas now on Substack. So let's have Richard himself. We're going to come in. Richard, you're back with us. So please say hello to 509,718 people around the world.
Hello.
Okay, he's very low-key fellow. That's why I love him on the show.
I hope they all heard me.
If I started telling everybody about what you do and who you are, so I take the rest of the show. So I just mentioned some data points. One is writer, investor, publisher of the Octavian Report, which is a magazine of ideas now on Substack. And the other pieces that I want to mention is that Richard is a historian, a very successful person, deeply involved in helping out, making sure that democracy doesn't die. And he's a dedicated Yaley. He lived being a Yalie. Okay, that's inside baseball stuff for a lot of people from around the world. That means that he didn't only go to Yale University. In fact, I'll even say when it was still okay, a different place maybe than today. He's still involved. He was a basic Jewish overachiever. He graduated in 3 years, and he does all the things that people do who are capable of doing many things, which is to touch humanity. So on that big note, Richard, first of all, thank you for being here. Welcome. Let's just jump right in and speak about something that the reason that I reached out to you and you were kind enough to respond and create what we're doing today is that you wrote an article that was published in the Wall Street Journal, and it had to do with President Herbert Hoover and the Jews, which is an interesting way of putting things. Herbert Hoover and the Jews. Now, most of the people that are listening are not necessarily from the United States, and they are under the age of 35. So I'm going to put Herbert Hoover in context with your permission. He was the 31st president of the United States. Right now, we have a 47th, so just give it terms of time. He was president from 1929, 1933. And his predecessor was somebody named Calvin Coolidge, who was a remarkable being in his own right. And his successor was FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president for 4 terms through something called the Second World War and was a major force in the history of America. Herbert Hoover was one of the most accomplished people that we've had in our country in the past 250 years. And that's not a small statement. So with your permission, Richard, let's talk about the article that you wrote, what it means, and why it captured my attention. Well, you won't know that. But let's talk about the article, because I found it remarkable and fascinating.
Sure. Thanks, Barry. Yeah, so it's an unknown part of Hoover's life. I mean, I guess as he's faded into history, what he's really, I think, known for unfairly is the fact that he was president during the Great Crash of '29 and then the beginning of the Great Depression. And, he's caricatured and entered into the popular imagination through, I guess, this may date me with your audience, but things like the, All in the Family and the musical Annie, where he's kind of caricatured as this sort of heartless villain who just sort of ignored the pain that was going on in the Depression. But of course, this was not true at all. And actually, the reason Hoover had come onto to basically international fame, he was born, and he was orphaned at a pretty young age in Iowa. He went to the first class ever at Stanford University and became a mining engineer, and was one of these amazing American stories. He was a Quaker, and he ended up building up a business by the time he was 40 all over the world, which at the time was really remarkable. He had interests as far as Australia. And when World War I broke out, he was in London and as a volunteer helped get Americans out of, who were trapped over there, get them back home. And then it became pretty clear that there was a humanitarian crisis brewing in Belgium. And again, he volunteered to bring food to prevent starvation in Belgium. This led to him basically running food relief and food logistics for the United States during the war, both on the home front and overseas. And he basically, during the war and in the post-war period, was the person who basically made sure that Europe didn't starve. And it's estimated that he saved as many as 80 million people from starvation, which one biographer of his said that he basically saved more people than anybody in the history of the world. And this obviously, made him a household name. And he then entered into a career in politics. He was Commerce Secretary under Coolidge, as you rightly point out, and as was his predecessor. And then he was elected to the presidency in 1928. Possibly had the worst timing of any president in history, because a few months into his presidency, the market crashed, and the Great Depression overtook the country, and whoever is in power generally gets blamed. So the shanty towns that were all over the country were nicknamed Hoovervilles, and that was sort of what became his reputation. But he had this very I think the humanitarianism was at the time very much crystallized around how people treated the Jews, who were kind of the most persecuted people. It was a very desperate situation, and Hoover, unlike his successor, FDR, was exceptional, both while he was president and then, during the period of time when, as an ex-president, he was still a major world figure. So I wanted to shine a light on that because I felt that, there's a historical injustice that his, reputation for somebody who saved so many people and was such one of the great humanitarians of the 20th century to be remembered as he is, I think is extraordinarily unfair. So, on the Holocaust.
Let me interrupt you and put you on pause just for one moment, because there's a lot of wonderful things that you've said, and they're remarkable, and people leaning in and say, what? I never heard of Herbert Hoover. He saved 80 million people, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to urge everybody, don't take notes. Don't write things down. Just lean in and experience what's happening here. And the beauty of the situation is, of course, this is recorded. So you can go back, listen again, pause when you want, write things down. And I'm going to urge you to listen the third time. That's when things really begin to sink in. But here you have an historic situation where you have a unique individual who, because of his belief systems and his work ethic and his abilities, goes out and saves tens of millions of people. And you can say to yourself, well, I never heard of him. Well, that's all the more reason to start learning. So I put you on pause only to say, now you are correcting historic injustice, as you say, and you write this article in the Wall Street Journal, and it's titled Herbert Hoover and the Jews, which again, I didn't know they go together. So what is it that he wrote about, spoke about the Jews? And again, this is 1930s, beginning of persecutions. There was no such thing as Israel, the state of Israel. Everybody has to keep that in mind. There may be Zionism, but there's no Israel. And what is he proposing to work to help the Jews?
Yeah, well, just to back up for a moment, he first became interested in the issue of the Jews during the post-war period of World War I, because the Poles, and you have to remember at the time there was a huge amount of anti-Semitism in Poland and Russia, and they were actually blocking food relief getting to very, very poor Jews, and he actually intervened. And when he was elected president, he had always been, interested and compassionate towards the plight of the Jews who were, particularly in Europe, were being persecuted. He was in favor of the Balfour Declaration, which was the British statement calling for a homeland for the Jews in the Middle East, in the Holy Land. And then, as he was leaving office, Adolf Hitler became chancellor of Germany, and was known for horrendous anti-Semitism. And the Jewish community in the United States approached both Hoover, who had lost the election but was still president, and FDR, who at the time was president-elect, and asked them to make a statement jointly denouncing the discrimination against the Jews in Germany. So it was 1933. And Hoover immediately said, of course, and FDR declined to do so. And so Hoover instructed his ambassador to Germany to protest the treatment of the Jews. And as soon as FDR came into office, he instructed his ambassador, who was Dodd, the father of the senator in Connecticut, to undo this and say it's not our problem. We should stay out of this. So Hoover was on the record pretty early about the anti-Semitism in Germany, and then through the 30s, as it built, he was very outspoken. After Kristallnacht in 1938, when there was basically a nationwide attack, it was the Night of Broken Glass that the Nazis sponsored against Jews. He that day went on the radio and gave a national address in the United States, denouncing the violence, saying this is a threat to civilization. He met because he was a former president. He was traveling through Berlin, and he was kind of forced to meet with Hitler. And he had a pretty famous meeting with him where they had a huge debate over the difference between fascism and democracy. And then Hoover, a few weeks later at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, gave a speech in which he sort of denounced fascism as being kind of antithetical to the American way of life and freedom. And he also particularly called out the treatment of the Jews and anti-Semitism. So Then when the war broke out, well, actually, I should mention one other thing.
Interrupt for a moment. So now, because you mentioned war a couple of times, now we're talking about the Second World War. First,
sorry.
was when Hoover saved 80 million people. Now comes the Second World War. And on that note, let's just pause for a moment. So we have sponsors that love the show and keep it going. And you want a cliffhanger because we want to know what's going to happen now with the Second World War and Hoover's the Jews. And we'll be right back after this brief message. Don't go away. There's more Richard on the other side of this break. See you in just a bit.
Hello, skincare connoisseurs. If you think you have tried everything in skincare, you are going to love what I am about to tell you. I'm pharmacist Benjamin I. Fuchs. I'm a dermatology pharmacist. And what I've discovered in my compounding pharmacy after decades of working with patients with skin traumas and skin diseases is the missing link in skincare is topical essential nutrition. And because of this missing link, we're not maximizing the potential of topical skincare. We're leaving skin beauty and skin health on the table. And that's why I formulated my Truth Treatments. Listen, the skin's an organ. It needs and wants and craves nutrients, vitamins, minerals, amino acids, fatty acids, and plant-derived minerals, and now it can get them in super high concentrations in my Truth Treatments. Originally formulated for dermatologists and their patients, now they're available to you. Check them out today at truthtreatments.com, and I know you are going to love the truth.
Good day. Beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. If you're good-looking, you're always looking for and finding the good. We found good in abundance. Our cup runneth over with good. His name is Richard Hurowitz, and we're discussing one of the more interesting people in American history who has been at least overshadowed by the person who succeeded him in office as president. And as a twist and an irony in history, in my humble opinion, Richard, Jews became passionately devoted to FDR and not to Herbert Hoover. And Herbert Hoover was one who was not just advocating for them, he was advocating for humanity. As you pointed out, he was able to debate the greatest monster in world history, Adolf Hitler, who was promoting fascism, which, by the way, is running rampant today in the world. Let's be very blunt. It happens to have another name called Islamism, Muslim Brotherhood. It's fascism, and how antithetical that is to the American way of life. And I'm sure that in Herbert Hoover's mind, not the other person, he won the debate. And that's why he was so passionate and now come back to America and go on record and try and help and see what's going on. So as World War II is breaking out for us in the end of 1941, what's happening with Herbert Hoover?
So I think it's important to understand also the refugee crisis and the plight of the Jews trapped in Europe, which is related to why, as you point out, FDR has quite a mixed record. So, the United States, like pretty much almost every country in the world, really refused to allow Jews who were under mortal threat, a safe haven. And FDR's State Department was rife with anti-Semitism. The guy, a close friend of his, who had been our ambassador to Italy, was very enamored with Mussolini, was in charge, unfortunately, at this time of basically the consular service that approved visas. And he wrote memos basically saying, we don't want undesirable people here, i.e. Jews, and he would do everything to block it. FDR kind of really went along with this and blocked a lot of plans to bring Jews here. And, almost with 1 year as an exception, we had very low quotas, actually, and we never even filled those quotas to allow Jews to come here. There was an effort, actually, to bring 20,000 Jewish children from Germany and Austria. This was a law that was, they call it the Wagner-Rogers Act, that would have the law that would have saved Anne Frank, because she would have been, she was a German Jew and hiding in Amsterdam. And Hoover, who was still a very prominent Republican, worked, and again, it was probably not even in his political interest. He worked very hard to try to get this bill through Congress, and ultimately it failed. But he was, constantly working to try to save people. And then, there was a conference. Sorry, let me back up. There was also a pageant it's a famous, it's sort of been lost to history, but a number of very prominent Hollywood actors and screenwriters, spearheaded by Ben Hecht, did a pageant called "We Will Never Die," which at the time was meant, and actually there were a number of non-Jews who participated, including Frank Sinatra and Burgess Meredith. And it was sold out Madison Square Garden twice. It toured. It went to Washington, where Eleanor Roosevelt saw it. It ended in the Hollywood Bowl. And it brought attention to the fact that at that point, 1 million Jews had been murdered in Germany. That was public information. I mean, people have this misunderstanding that we didn't know. And there was a group spearheaded by a guy who went by the name of Peter Bergson, whose real name was Hillel Kook. He was the nephew of the chief rabbi in Israel, and or at the time Palestine. And he was taking out full-page ads in the New York Times saying that the Jews were being massacred and that something had to be done. Hoover became very involved with this organization, which was called the Bergson Group, bringing public agitation on behalf of the Jews. So for the pageant, he was the most prominent member of the sponsoring committee. So he lent his name as an ex-president to this pageant. And then there was a conference that the British and the Americans had in Bermuda to address what they called the refugee crisis. And basically they did nothing. And the Bergson Group took out full-page ad in the New York Times denouncing this, which FDR did not appreciate it. And the first person to sign it, and the most prominent person to sign it, was Herbert Hoover. And then,
I pause just for one moment, because first of all, this is remarkably powerful information. All true, of course. Richard is not given to exaggeration or making things up. And I can picture in my mind this full-page ad in the New York Times, which in itself is a paper that should be ashamed because they were not in any way helpful to the situation of the plight of Jews. And I can see his signature on there. I'm imagining it, much like John Hancock signing the Declaration of Independence. A big name saying, I am with this, not just this bill, but the intention here. What is the intention? To save people who will be slaughtered. We're not talking about, gee, maybe it happened. They want, they're fleeing because they don't have good economic opportunities. No, they need to be saved because they will be killed. And in fact, that's what happened. We were dealing with monsters who would kill Jews just because they're Jews. Am I correct in that?
Yes, and as I assume most people know, but you never know, 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust. And
by the way, not everybody knows, and not everybody believes that.
Well, there's indisputable evidence to that effect. And you can go back even by learning about the Hoover story. You can see what was being said. After this conference, there was a kind of a responsive conference that was held to actually try to do something. And Hoover was involved with organizing it and then gave a remarkable keynote address on the national radio. And the administration had been saying under FDR, look, the only way to save the Jews is to win the war. But of course, that was while Auschwitz was going on and there were millions of Jews being slaughtered. They could not wait for the end of the war. And that was also true. There were other people being persecuted. There were gays being persecuted. There were Roma. There were political dissidents. There were disabled people. Also, the Nazis were,
they were killing them. They went into places, institutions, sanatoriums, et cetera, and took people out and killed them. We're dealing with monsters.
So Hoover was a former engineer, actually went on the radio and said, he outlined a plan that he had been working on with Bernard Baruch and some others to bring Jews to develop Africa, in the center of Africa, as an adjunct to Palestine. He was a Zionist, and he did believe that the Jews should be brought to the Holy Land. But he also was a realist at the time with the war going on. He wanted to develop uninhabited parts of Central Africa. It would have been a project at the time would have cost several $100 million. There was a thought that diaspora Jews would finance it. And it would also have brought other refugees, not just Jews there. And he also had a plan to logistically bring Jews who were trapped in Europe to neutral places before, and then they would be dealt with after the war and resettled or go back home. But they would be safe during the conflict and certainly safe from the Nazis. So that was what he went on record for. He also pushed in 1944 to have a platform in the Republican Party calling for a homeland for the Jews, which then forced the Democrats to do that as well. So it became bipartisan, but that was also quite important. And then he later, after the war, came up with what was called the Hoover Plan, where again, using his engineering skills, he proposed. And by the way, like Truman worked with Hoover. He didn't have the same animosity toward him that FDR did. So they worked. He used Hoover the way a lot of ex-presidents are used, as sort of an emissary to deal with starvation issues after the war. And Hoover again put a program forward, at that point, to basically redevelop part of what's now Iraq to create a fairly prosperous area for Arabs to go to, and then a smaller place in what's now Israel for the Jews. We have to remember at the time, in the post-war period, population exchange was a very recognized and very real way that things were settled. Refugees ended up, and in 1948, almost 1 million Jews would be expelled from all of the Arab countries, and so he was very interested in sort of practical. He called it peace through engineering, and he was very interested in kind of practical solutions. But in the height of the war and the Holocaust. Sorry.
Let me interrupt you for a moment.
Of course.
Buzz and unpack some things here, because you've mentioned the P word a number of times, and it's really powerful. What is the P word? Plan. Hoover was not just a man with ideas. He really had plans, and not just plans that, well, maybe this could work. He had proven throughout his life that things worked. Like you said, First World War, after the First World War, saving what appears to be, like you said, 80 million people. We're not dealing with a person who just says, hey, if I got an idea. We're dealing with a person who's been successful. And just to put it in place, you said so I wouldn't say forced, but he proposed for the Republicans to have a plank in their platform in 1944 that the Jews should have the state of Israel, create the state of Israel. And that the Democrats had to respond also and became bipartisan. Now, unfortunately, if you fast forward to 2024, let's call that whatever that is, from 1944 to 2024, that's 56, 7, 80 years. And the Democrats have removed that definitely from their platform. I mean, they removed it already a few years before. So it's a remarkable situation that what you have today mimics much of what happened in the early days after World War II. You talk about population exchange. You didn't have a country called India. You didn't have a country called Pakistan. These are, I wouldn't say made up, but they certainly were created for purposes of having people live by themselves in a harmonious situation by themselves to not create more war. And you realize that having Iraq, let's say, for Arabs, and Palestine now renamed Israel for Jews, well, isn't that great? People can live in their own land and develop. That's not what happened, is it?
No, and you're right about Hoover. His foremost quality was his competence, and so even before he went into the public sphere, he had order of magnitude 100,000 people working for his businesses all over the world, and he was able to manage them. Yeah, I mean, Israel for most of the Cold War and even until more recently was a bipartisan issue. Going back to FDR, I think it's a counterfactual, obviously, and we can never prove this is right, but I think it was, had he continued to be president and not died at the end of the war and Truman come in, I don't think there actually would have been a state of Israel, because he was sort of captured very much by the State Department, which has generally had both anti-Semitism and a view that there's a lot more Arabs than Jews, and it's kind of reminiscent also. I think had we not had Churchill who's another really interesting figure as prime minister, who, like Hoover, saw the Nazis for what they were, was also a philo-Semite, I think the world would have gone in a very different direction.
So let's talk about, then do a shift. By the way, notice that Richard used the term philo-Semite. I want everybody to know that. That one you might want to write down because it's not used that much. There's too much anti-Semitism in the world today. And there were and still are philo-Semites. And it's to their great credit that there are. Let's use that as a movement into your book. And it's one of your books, but the book is that literally is shaking the world, and for good reason. I'm going to read a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll go deeper into it. And the introduction is like because you wrote it on your site, the Second World War took the lives of more than 50 million people. And more than 6 million of them, Jews, were exterminated, not just didn't die, they were exterminated through crimes of such enormity that a new name came to describe the horror called the Holocaust. And yet, amid all this darkness, there were glimmers of light. And the glimmers of light is what Richard is focusing on. He has dedicated a number of years of his life and his prodigious abilities as a scholar to put together a remarkable tome, that's another word for book, another remarkable tome called In the Garden of the Righteous. And it's really amazing because it chronicles extraordinary acts at a time when the moral choices were stark, the threat immense, and the passive apathy of millions predominated. And he talks about, with great research and truly heart-moving writing. I mean, you are a good writer, Richard.
Thank you.
Stories of people who put their lives on the line to do what is right, which is to save Jewish lives, which were at risk. Everybody knew it. Wherever you lived, it was said, you hide Jews, you will die if we catch you. It was that stark. We're not talking about, gee, maybe something will happen. This is real. The book is called In the Garden of the Righteous. So first of all, I want to say a huge thank you to you for bringing this to the world. We only have a few minutes before our next commercial. I would like you, if you would, do the impossible. You can do that. Let's start with one story that truly moves you.
Well, I think the Christian Science Monitor called the chapter 1 story of Aristides de Sousa Mendes. He was the breakout star of the book. There's something really powerful about him. He was a Portuguese diplomat. He was an aristocrat. His brother was the foreign minister. And he was one of these diplomats that was like sort of a bon vivant. So he had like 14 children, and he entertained Einstein. And
one wife, 14 children. Not Elon Musk. One wife, 14 children.
Yes, exactly. And he found himself posted to Bordeaux in 1940. And the dictator of Portugal.
Bordeaux is in southern France.
Yes, right on the Spanish border. And Spain was neutral, although it leaned towards the Nazis because Franco, who was a fascist, was in charge there, and he had been supported by Hitler and Mussolini. And the Portugal, which is kind of inside of Spain, if you think about it geographically, was the dictator there was a guy named Salazar. And he was very determined that there not be a refugee crisis because he did not want Portugal to get pulled into the war. So he had issued a circular saying that nobody could come into Portugal, which was neutral. So if you remember the movie Casablanca, everybody at the beginning is in Casablanca and Morocco waiting to get to Portugal. And the famous line, you wait and wait and wait. But this was the place, if you got to Lisbon, you could then get out of Europe into the New World. So Sousa Mendes, because he was a diplomat, actually had the ability to give people visas. But Salazar had told all of his diplomats that they could not allow anybody in without explicit permission from Lisbon who were Jews or people on the run from the Nazis. And this had really upset Sousa Mendes, and he had allowed a couple of people who were quite desperate in earlier in the year, and he'd been reprimanded. And then what happened was in 1940, June of 1940, the Nazis invaded France, which came as a very big shock to people. And I opened the book actually with the people who wrote Curious George. They were bicycled literally from Paris down to Bordeaux with the manuscript for Curious George in the bicycle. And there were literally, they think it's the biggest traffic jam in human history. Millions of people were streaming down out of Paris in front of the Nazis who were following. And many people went to Bordeaux, including the government of France. And also Charles de Gaulle was there. And so millions of people come to Bordeaux, and they're going door to door to the different consulates asking for exit visas to get out because you needed to have a place to go. And everybody shut the door, including the United States of America. And then Sousa Mendes, there was a rumor that went around that maybe the Portuguese consulate, he had helped some people in the past, maybe he would help Jews.
Let's do one thing. On that note, the cliffhanger, the Portuguese diplomat in Bordeaux, what's going to happen? We're going to go to a break. We wouldn't have these sponsors. We didn't think they're worthy of your time and attention. We'll be right back with Richard and letting us know what's going to happen in Bordeaux right after this brief message. Don't go away.
What if you could shop at your favorite local stores, swipe your current credit card, and get extra cashback rewards? And what if you could also have donations sent to your favorite cause at no extra cost to you? What if this amazing program was absolutely free and very simple to set up? Well, What If is here. Welcome to Einstein Cares, where your everyday shopping gives you and your favorite cause extra money. It's fast, it's easy, and effortless.
Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. Every good-looking show is looking for and finding the good. We found good in abundance. His name is Richard Hurowitz. We're talking about a book that is an important read for everybody listening. Find a way to get a hold of this book in your library. Buy it, whatever way you can do it, but get the book and read it because it will move you and shift you into a higher realm of humanity. So let's talk about this remarkable diplomat, father of 14 children, a bon vivant, who may be going against his own government.
Well, he absolutely went against his own government because he had been under orders not to do this, but this crowd appeared outside of the Portuguese embassy, and he went outside because he was, taken and sort of he was upset by what he was witnessing. There were terrible scenes, and he met a young rabbi who had a very large family as well, and he said to him, my family's back in Portugal except my two oldest kids. I have a pretty big consulate. Why don't you spend the night? I don't want all your children to sleep on the street. And they ended up talking through the night, and Sousa Mendes said to him at the end, he said, I think I can give you visas for you and your family. And the rabbi said to him, well, I could never do that. What about all the other Jews? I couldn't just take them for myself.
Wait a minute. I want to hear this again. Mr. Menendez is offering him freedom, life, and he says, yes, however, what about all the others?
Yes. So Sousa Mendes was thunderstruck by this. I read he took to his bed. I read the letter he wrote to his brother, where he was a twin, where he basically described having a nervous breakdown. And then he got out of bed in a very dramatic moment that was witnessed by a number of people. And he said to his family, he said, I would rather stand with God against man than with man against God. And then he went out on the street and he said, I will now give a visa to any person who needs it, regardless of your race or religion. And then he started writing visas like crazy. And among the people he wrote visas for, in addition to people like the Habsburgs and the Rothschilds and Salvador Dali and the people who wrote Curious George, were also just tons and tons of very poor Jews on the run. And interestingly, as things go, a British woman came into the consulate and asked for a normal travel visa. And she was asked to wait because of the crisis going on. And all these desperate people. And in an act of supreme pettiness, she complained to the British embassy. This was important because they wired Lisbon. Salazar found out and ended up sending a couple of his senior diplomats to stop Sousa Mendes. Sousa Mendes then began a kind of cat and mouse escapade throughout the southwest of France, including taking people across the border to Spain himself, which was neutral and therefore safe. And this went on, and it was a race against the clock because everybody knew that France was going to surrender soon and the Germans would come. And so this went on for several weeks. He wrote thousands of visas, and then when the French capitulated, he was summoned back to Lisbon. And for all of his efforts, he was put up on disciplinary action. He was found to be in violation of his orders, but the initial finding was he was motivated by humanitarian impulse. Salazar personally vetoed this, fired him, stripped him of his pension. He had come from a very wealthy family. He went through all of his money. His wife died. He had a stroke. His children had to leave Portugal. They couldn't work there. And he kind of died this very sad, penniless end. He also, the only people that would take care of him were the Jews in the soup kitchen. He had a very powerful moment where he went in and there were two lines, and a teenage boy gave testimony that he saw this very elegant gentleman with threadbare diplomatic garb, and he was in line for the refugees. And he said to him, you know, there's a separate line for Portuguese people that was nicer. And Sousa Mendes says, we're all refugees. And what was remarkable is that Salazar actually later in the war switched sides, became an ally of the United States and England, became a founding member of NATO. And one of the ways he was able to do this is he said, look, we took in all these refugees. So he literally took credit for what Sousa Mendes, which drove Sousa Mendes crazy. And in the end, his actions, they believe, are the single largest rescue by a single individual in the Holocaust. So he saved probably about 10,000 people. I've seen numbers as high as 30,000 people, which means that today, when you do the math of descendants, there's hundreds of thousands of people alive today, specifically because of him. He was eventually honored at Yad Vashem by the Israelis and then by the Americans in the 80s, but it wasn't until the 90s that he was actually rehabilitated in Portugal, where he's now a national hero. And so, but there's something extraordinarily powerful about his humanitarian impulse. When he defended himself, and he just said, I could not bear to watch this. And he actually said he should be a credit to Portugal, because Portugal has always been a country that welcomed those on the run. And he had this like just wonderful impulse when everybody else around him did not. And then he paid a very big price, as many of these people did. And they were very, very rare. I mean, I mentioned he was given the title of righteous among the nations. There's 27,000 people who have that. The title of my book is The Garden Where They Plant a Tree. That sounds like a lot of people, but that's out of 500 million people in Europe. So one example I think is helpful is if you fill up Madison Square Garden, I'm sitting here in New York and the Knicks won last night. If you fill up Madison Square Garden with a representative sample of the population, you'd have one person. So
let's unpack a few things here, because I can attest to something. I'm crying. I've read the book. I can imagine that there are hundreds of thousands of people right now listening, watching, or stunned, touched. Because, again, I urge everybody, this is not just a book you pick up. This is something to be aware of, especially in light of what's happening right now in the year 2025, vis-a-vis Israel, Jews, etc. I don't want to, that was a very high note, what we just talked about. I don't want to be a down note. I want to add something to it that I think will shake people up as well. And it occurs much later in the book, in the last chapter, about a particular woman who was saved as a young girl by 10 British prisoners. And it was a very telling moment when this young girl from Lithuania, I believe, had been on the run, and because she knew German, she was able to literally be saved and such. And she was working alongside in a farm, working alongside a German girl. This is by the end of the war, when everybody knew that Germany had lost. The Russians were coming. The Americans were coming. It was over. However, a young girl she was working with on the farm named Annie said to this girl, her name is Sonia, I'm quoting now from the book, you know, Sonia, we lost the war, but we did win the war against the Jews. We killed them all. A young girl said this to another young girl, not knowing that she was Jewish, as they were like, yeah, we lost, but we killed the Jews. What an amazing idea that it even should fit in any human being. And it applies not just to Jews, to any other group of human beings. It stuns the mind. So again, I don't want to be on a low note. I think it's a crescendo. And I'm only sorry to say the words I'm going to say to you right now. By the way, Richard, I did create an acronym for your name because we love acronyms. May I read it to you?
Of course.
Your name is Richard, R-I-C-H-A-R-D. Richard stands for, because it comes from the book, resilience inspires creative happiness, awakening remarkable determination.
Well, I want you to tell my children that.
I will send it to you. You like it?
Yeah, I do.
Well, it came from the book because it came from you. And it's powerful on the most visceral level. So again, I urge everybody, find a way to make yourself find the book, read it, get it, do something, anything you can do. So I say, I'm loath to say the following words. We're coming to a close for our time together. I have 3 quick questions for you, Richard. You ready?
Yep.
Number 1, will you come back again?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Number 2, Richard Hurowitz. You have only 80 seconds to answer this question.
Right.
What is your most fervent desire?
Well, I wish that more people in the world would act like the people in the book. And more importantly, you know, there's a chapter on Denmark, and there were places in Europe that rescued all of their Jews. Denmark, Albania, majority Muslim, a town called Le Chambon I write about. And it is possible for that to happen. And for another time, we can talk about why. But I do think if we have the right values in the right community, then we can prevent hate, and we can, you know, prevent the rise of totalitarianism on the left and the right. And it's very possible. And those are lessons I think that are really powerful because they give us hope. So I would love for us to, I think one day we'll get there. We can't get there soon enough, but to have a culture and a community where we don't allow things like this to happen. And the short hack of it is when everybody stands together and everybody sort of has a common view that we're not going to tolerate hate, you can even stand up to the Nazis the way the Danes did and other people did, and rescue everybody who's persecuted.
Thank you. And the third question, may I give you a hug in front of 511,917 people around the world?
Yeah, I installed that function on the Zoom before the podcast, so absolutely.
Well, let me tell you what HUG stands for. Heartfelt, because it goes with the book. Heartfelt, unlimited giving. You ready? 1, 2, 3.
There we go.
And again, you're listening to The Joy of Living with your humble host, Barry Shore, the ambassador of joy, and our wonderful, amazing guest, Richard Hurowitz and Barry Shore. And again, this show is not about Richard, fabulous fellow that he is, or Barry, great guy. It's about you, Y-O-U. And the reason you tuned in is because, you know, we talked about the 3 fundamentals of life, which we did. Number 1, life has purpose. And when you lead a purpose-driven life, you go mad. Mad means make a difference in the world, as you just heard about. It's remarkable, not just a story, a human being. And the third is to unlock the power and the secrets of everyday words and terms. WWW, what a wonderful world. Smile, seeing miracles in life every day. As my 8-year-old niece says, seeing miracles in everyday life. Create the kind of world you want to live in, causing rethinking, enabling all to excel. Shift your perspective into love, away from hate. And remember the 6 most important words, as you heard that great story: choice, not chance, determines your destiny. And the path of your life and your trajectory, you, the power of one person, can make a difference in the world. And of course, use the two most powerful words in English language 3 times a day from now and forever. And the result is you'll be happier, healthier, and wealthier. Say the 2 words. Thank you, thank you, thank you. To harmonize and nurture kindness. Keep inspiring noble deeds. So a blessing from Richard and Barry. Go forth. Live exuberantly. Spread the seeds of joy, happiness, peace, and love. Go mad. Go make a difference. Richard, don't go away, okay?
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joy of Living podcast. Now that's another step towards your healthier, happier, and wealthier life. Never hesitate to do good in the world, no matter what the situation. Join us for another upbeat discussion next time at barryshore.com. And be sure to leave a rating and subscribe to the show to get more conversations like this. And remember to share it with your family and friends too. See you on the next episode.